So with that, we will accept the minutes as published. Thank you, everybody. You are also sent today's agenda. Thank you for taking time to review the agenda. We've got several things to talk about. Are there any suggested changes to the agenda? Just giving some wait time, folks. Making sure I'm scrolling through everybody's name. I don't see any hands. So we will proceed with today's agenda as published. Thank you. So with that, Kate, let me turn it over to you and talk about some of the updates from the Maryland Center for School Safety.
Great, thank you, Dr. Arlotto. So Dr. Arlotto and the board, you have some guest presenters today and a very important discussion. So we're going to make the updates from the Center for School Safety as short as possible. So in addition to welcoming Chief Kiefer to the advisory board, in June, the subcabinet welcomed Colonel Jones, the new superintendent of the Maryland State Police, as well as Carl Ponthier, who represents the Office of the Attorney General. Additionally, in March, MCSS welcomed our own new team member. So Craig Meister joined our team as the Communications and Engagement Manager, and you're going to get to meet him and hear from him in just a few minutes. So the subcabinet last met on August 31st. They approved 9 local school systems Safe Schools Fund grants applications and had presentations and the opportunity to hear from both Baltimore County and Worcester County Public Schools on their successful SRO programs. So it was a very great meeting and a good discussion. MCSS has 3 grants available for this year. The Hate Crimes Grant, which closed on September 4th. That's a grant for schools and daycare facilities that are at risk for hate crimes. We have the SRO grant, which closes on October 30th. That is for local school systems and law enforcement agencies to be able to support and enhance their SRO programs as well, or to include adequate coverage. The Safe Schools Fund grant closes also on October 30th, and that is for local school systems. In July, MCSS hosted our summer seminar series. So this event actually took our annual school safety conference online. So typically we run a school safety conference every summer. This year we had to do things a little differently and we did things online. So we ended up we had 4 presentations over the month of July. Week 1, we had violence prevention and response in a rapidly changing world. In week 2, we had situational awareness in today's reality. In week 3, very timely, we had suicide prevention and awareness, including mental health and wellness. And then in week 4, we had smart strategies to support students transitioning back to school. All the participants for all 4 weeks were both from within the state of Maryland as well as other states. The reviews and the evaluations for all the presentations were excellent. So we're really excited. This virtual environment has caused us to sort of rethink how we deliver resources to our partners. So the team has really come up with some creative solutions. So next, I'm going to introduce my deputy, Dino Pignataro, and he's going to provide a quick training update from the center.
Good morning. Working hard all summer. We're bringing the SRO mandated and SSC mandated training into the virtual format. We're doing this along the lines also of being able to keep the ability of sworn law enforcement officers to also have their credits from the MPCTC, the Maryland Police Training Corrections Commission. So that's been a challenge, but the folks working under me have been great doing their job, and they've led this thing leaps and bounds. We also came up with understanding the role of the school resource officer. This is a 3-hour class for administrators and anybody who would like to understand what the role of the SRO is actually in the school system. We gave the pilot class for this on August 11th, and we have received nothing but tremendous reviews about this. We're starting to plan to give this class again. If you have any requests for training from the MCSS, you're going to get ready to hear about our revised website shortly. I'm not going to steal that thunder, but there is a link now for training requests. So we ask that you go to the website, get up on that link, so that we can have a workflow path and planning for all of our training coming up, because we're trying to get requests in for certain amounts of training that we've been mandated to give. So with that, I won't take your time up any longer, and have a good day at meeting.
Thank you, Dino. Dino mentioned the Understanding the Role of the SRO course that we presented in August. We did a pilot in person in February, which went very well. We conducted that with the mental health services coordinators. And then in August, we did an online version with almost close to 300 participants. I really want to thank the advisory board for that class. So in addition to the school resource officers who took the training, recommending that the center develop the Understanding the Role of the SRO training, the advisory board also made that recommendation to us. So we really thank you, because again, the recommendations that you make do help us move forward. So we thank you for that. So next, I'm going to ask Craig to provide an update on our communications and engagement.
Thank you, and I hope you guys all had a wonderful summer. This summer, MCSS team members were hard at work launching our new and improved website, as was mentioned just a moment ago. It can be found at schoolsafety.maryland.gov. The new site has an intuitive and streamlined design that shares with visitors background information about our history and our evolution, important up-to-date information about our grant and training opportunities, an entire section devoted to the Safe Schools Maryland Anonymous Reporting System, and resources and news and notes related to the full spectrum of and trending school safety topics. We're excited that the new site is user-friendly and it really is streamlined. Again, the old site had a lot of articles and a lot of different nooks and crannies and places, and this site is much more streamlined. That's a key word. And we're particularly focused on maintaining the site's news and notes blog as a means to keep all interested Marylanders up to date with current school safety matters related and related MCSS resources. For instance, though we're just starting out, in just the last several weeks, we've added 4 posts to the news and notes site of the blog. And one of these was a guest post where one of our team members analyzes a new DOJ report on school safety. And another one links to a podcast in which another MCSS team member and subject matter expert was recently featured. So there's really good variety of posts coming out. And actually, next week, our executive director will have a guest post about preparing youth for emergencies that you should definitely be on the lookout for. So all in all, we want our new site to be a go-to resource for students and adults across the state. And over the coming months, we will continue to work very hard to ensure that it meets this goal, and we'll continue to build out. So thank you for your time, and I'll throw it back to Kate.
Craig, before you pass it back, would you like to talk a little bit about the student focus group?
Yes, well, the student focus group has been very hard at work. We have a representative on our call today, Jay Shree. They have been doing amazing work, and in addition to giving us feedback on how we can be better, they're going to be actually doing sort of a student focus group Friday on our Instagram feed, where they're going to start contributing student authored content. And that's going to be really exciting, so that students can hear from fellow students about school safety matters. In addition, they had a great presentation over the summer from our own Donna Cronin, and learn a lot about online safety and school safety matters. And later this month, they're actually going to be taking part in sort of a newer version of our Understanding the Role of the SRO course, The first one was geared toward professionals who work in school safety every day and school administrators. This one will be geared toward the student audience, to making sure that the students on the student focus group have a really clear conceptualization of the role of the SRO, because even though they are often in schools together, that's something we really want to drive home the point to more and more students. So getting student feedback from the student focus group on that presentation, I think, will be invaluable. I could go on all day, but our own Emily Allen has been worked incredibly hard with the student focus group as well, to make sure that it's a give and take both ways. And so we're excited to see how this relationship develops over the coming weeks and months.
Thanks, Craig. Jayshree, is there anything you wanted to comment about the student focus group and how it's going?
Yeah, I mean, in general, the student focus group is a really dynamic group of students, and they have geographic diversity in terms of being from different counties, as well as just bringing different perspectives to the table. And since day one, everyone has been extremely active, even in these online meetings, and participating and showing their desire to really facilitate some change this year. So I'm excited for what's to come. I think Mr. Meister kind of covered all the highlights there, but yeah, thank you for asking my input.
Excellent. And we really wouldn't have a student focus group at the moment if it weren't for Jayshree, because she really did most of the heavy lift in the beginning. I will also say that the idea of the student focus group was Lucas Tarbell. Most of you remember Lucas. He was our original advisory board student representative. So we can all thank him for the creation of the student focus group as well. So if those are the updates from MCSS, and if there are no questions, I will turn it back to Dr. Arletto.
Thank you, Kate. Thank you, Craig. And Jayshree, thank you very much. Are there any questions regarding the update or the Maryland Center? Anybody from the committee before we move on? Seeing none, thank you. Moving on with today's agenda. We've got topic we wanted, the topic for discussion today is juvenile arrest data in Maryland, and in particular, obviously, our schools. And so this is a conversation that is happening at the state level across the state in all 24 of the LEAs. The State Board of Education recently received a presentation from the State Department of Education on juvenile arrest data, and the subcabinet has undertaken this as and has asked us to undertake this in terms of advice. And so this conversation will start today and then into the future, and hopefully we can provide some food for thought for the subcabinet. So with that, Kate, I think we've got two different presentations to talk about the arrest data in schools.
Thank you. So I'm going to turn it over to Andrew Turner. So Andy actually leads our prevention and intervention side of the house at the Center for School Safety. So Andy is going to introduce our presenters today.
Good morning, everyone. This is a topic that has gained a lot of momentum and is talking about defining and improving student arrest data. And to start that off, we need to find out what MSDE is doing in reference to that. And we have Ron Brown and also Walt Solly from MSDE.
Okay, good morning, everyone. I hope you can see the screen. Data review on suspensions and expulsions. And we're going to start with suspensions and expulsions and also move on to student arrest data, because we do believe there are some correlations there. And at this point, I'll turn it over to Ron Brown my co-presenter, to talk about what's happening with school arrests. So thank you for having us today. This is a very important topic, and the Department of Education has done a lot of work in this area. I want to start off with just some data over the past 5 years, from 2014-15 school year up until the 2018-19 school year. You will see that we were at 4% in terms of the percentage of students suspended or expelled. It has incrementally increased a bit to 4.7 in the 2018-19 school year. It is important to note, though, even though we have seen some incremental increases over the past few years, just not long before the 2014-15 school year, the state of Maryland was at about 8 or 9% of suspension. So we've done a lot of work, and we know that we also have a lot of work to do with regard to this. And I will share some of the strategies. Some of them cross over to what we're doing with arrests as well. We'll share some strategies on how we plan to address this topic. The next thing I'd like to show you is that this is an update. We did this presentation to the State Board of Education not that long ago, and show you where the suspensions fall in terms of elementary, middle, and high school in particular. You'll see, of course, that the most suspensions occur at the high school level, and the percentages that are calculated at the top are based on the enrollment for that particular year, over the divided by the number of suspensions that took place. Again, this pattern shows the gradual increase that I spoke about over the past few years, and you'll see that there are fewer suspensions at the elementary school level. The next slide indicates an issue that we are really working hard in the department to try to solve. And, you know, in student services at MSDE, it's an all-out effort to address this topic of disproportionality. What this slide clearly shows that there's a disproportionate amount of African-American students being suspended out of school with relation to their peers. Over the past few years, African-American students in 2014-15 were suspended at a rate of 7.1%, and there's been some fluctuations over the years, and right now we stand at 7.9, with 23,000 students being suspended. You'll see that, you'll see the disproportionality clear there for if you look at this with regard to white students and even Hispanic students and the other populations in this table. And I'll talk a little bit about the efforts that we have to address some of this as well. The next table shows the relationship between males and females over the past 5 years. You'll see that the pattern is pretty steady, with males being suspended at just about twice, more or less, twice the rate of their female counterparts from 14-15 through the 2018 to 2019 school year. I know that this is an issue that our state board is looking at as well. I believe there is a work group now looking at the achievement and discipline for African American boys. There was also a work group last year that looked at our discipline practices with regard to not only the issue with boys and girls, but also disproportionality as it relates to the male-female situation as well. Some key initiatives. So, you know, the data tells us that we need to take a hard look at this and come up with ways to address the issue. One of the key initiatives that we are implementing in student services at the State Department of Education is the Positive Behavioral Interventions and Supports framework, which is looking at the evidence-based practices and how they're being implemented in a tiered system across schools and school systems. And what that means is that there are some interventions that are designed for all students. And if you look at the medical model, the tiered approach, you go into tier 2, which looks at a need for more intensive interventions. And then at tier 3, you get even more intense interventions. All students will receive, if you're in tier 1, and move to tier 2, you'll still receive all of the interventions at tier 1, but you will also receive on top of that additional interventions to look at behavior. All school systems are implementing PBIS in some form or fashion. We have a PBIS work group. We have a PBIS state leadership team meeting, which is actually taking place later on today. And we're looking at all of these issues, not only the behavioral piece, but we're also looking at the culturally responsive piece as well, as I mentioned. Restorative Approaches is now the law in Maryland, and it states that school systems in the state of Maryland must take a relationship-focused approach to discipline that is primarily preventative and proactive. So we're looking at stopping some of these behaviors before they actually happen. And then when they do happen, to make sure that we are thinking of suspensions as a last resort. So we're looking at building strong relationships, setting clear behavioral expectations, focusing on accountability for harm, and address ways to repair relationships in hopes that we can implement some of these methods as opposed to going straight to suspension. Restorative approaches include a lot of different things. So you may have heard the term restorative practices, which is very specific and it's a specific program. But what the Maryland legislature did is took a wider approach to restorative approaches, and it includes restorative practices, but it also includes conflict resolution, peer mediation, circle processes, social emotional learning, which is also a very important, a hot topic now as well, particularly with students who've been disconnected from the schoolhouse for a while now, since March, and are just getting back into those school-based services and having full access to those school-based services again. And we're not quite there yet, as we know, as school systems have opened virtually, and depending on the school system, some are looking at reassessing that in the future and deciding when to phase students back in. But we know that there is there's a need for these mental health supports since students have been disconnected from the school-based services. Trauma-informed care is another one that is very important to us. This is looking at some of the trauma that students may have faced prior to their entry into school or even during that time. So we're looking at the symptoms, the signs that students may exhibit, and training teachers and school-based staff on how to deal with that. Currently, we're implementing through our Bureau of Justice Assistance Stop School Violence grant a program called ACE Interface. ACE stands for Adverse Childhood Experiences, and looking at ways to identify these symptoms, as I've said, and then address them with students. And to make sure that we are, again, we're not suspending students as a first resort. We're looking at these other things. We're looking at the tiered interventions that they may receive under a PBIS framework. We're looking at trauma-informed care, and we're looking at restorative approaches as well. With regard to disproportionality, I mean, that slide that I showed earlier kind of paints the picture, and it sets us up for the work that we need to do. I remember my staff, Kim Buckheit, whom some of you may have met in your circle. She's been to every school system, has worked with every team on this issue, and has provided technical assistance and coaching to school-based staff, to central office staff, administrators, and the like. She's worked directly with the school systems that have identified schools, there are 14, and she's provided that direct coaching and direct support. But I also would like to say that even though there were 14 school systems identified under the Maryland model for disproportionality, all school systems are taking a proactive approach, meaning that all school systems have teams that are looking at this issue and have worked with us to try to prevent falling into the disproportionate category and to being identified as a school system with schools that are identified as disproportionate. So I think that's kudos to our Maryland school systems that are really taking a hard look at this and being proactive in their approach to looking at disproportionality. As part of our work, you'll see on this slide, as I mentioned, all schools are engaged and focused on addressing this issue. Each school system has done a root cause analysis and has identified some of the root causes of the disproportionality and have developed plans to address it and to reduce it. The state is under a mandate to reduce disproportionality and then eventually eliminate it over a 3-year period. There's also a focus here on pre-K to 2. The law prohibits suspension of students in pre-K to 2nd grade, except under extreme circumstances where there may be imminent threat of serious harm to the student or other students. And that has to be vetted through the school psychologist, who makes a recommendation then to the administrator about suspension. But suspensions for minor offenses, disrespect, and those sorts of things is prohibited under state law. And so the MSDE has worked with a group of stakeholders, staff from multiple divisions, directors of student services, school administrators, classroom teachers, and did some good work to produce a guidance document that kind of spells out, first of all, what's required under the law and what's prohibited under the law. But not only that, but it also goes into some of the approaches that can be used to mitigate suspending students particularly in this age group. And you will see in the guidance there are additional, the ones that I mentioned earlier, some of those approaches, there are additional ones in the guidance as well. And our staff at Department of Education Student Services staff is providing ongoing technical assistance to local school systems to implement the initiatives that I mentioned and some others that are in that guidance to make sure that we are not suspending kids out of school unnecessarily, and really working to get those numbers down. Okay. With that, I will pause and introduce my colleague, Dr. Ron Brown, who is our school safety specialist. He's also been working with all of the school systems and with the Maryland Center for School Safety. And I also want to tout our relationship with the Maryland Center for School Safety and working with us, and not only with arrest, but also have been working with us with regard to those prevention and intervention strategies that I mentioned earlier. So Ron, take it away, sir. Ron, I think you're muted.
How about now?
There you go.
All right. Can you guys see the PowerPoint okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. Apologize. Again, you know, I often get really excited about presenting about arrest data. It's been a passion of mine for a long time, even prior to arriving with the Department of Education. You know, again, you know, for me, it's funny. It's kind of serendipitous in the fact that my thesis was really on this topic when I was at the University of Maryland, and so it's kind of bringing me full circle. But I want to start by saying, whenever we talk about arrest data, whenever I present arrest data, I feel like it's important to really discuss the evolution with regards to where we began, where we are, and where we're going. With that said, as Walt just discussed, really arrest data came on the heels of suspension data in Maryland, but really, you know, there was a significant push nationally due to the school to prison pipeline to really collect this data to kind of address the disparities in discipline that really existed across the nation. With regards to the implementation of guidance with regards to arrest data, you know, we felt it was really, really important to work with our stakeholders in developing this data collection instrument. One of the things we recognized after the first year collecting was that there was a severe distrust, or how can I put it, reluctance with from local school systems with regards to the collection of arrest data. They didn't really understand the objective. So we felt it was important to kind of repurpose and rebrand the goals and objective with arrest data. And you know, in order to accomplish that, what we did was we held a webinar prior to the 2016, 17, 2018, 19 collection. And what we told them was basically collecting this data is not an opportunity to a got you moment. It's really an opportunity to highlight some blind spots that local school systems might have as it pertains to disciplinary practices, and really to enhance and improve those processes. One of the other things we did that we felt was important was to kind of somewhat decriminalize the school. So what we did was we replaced the arrest codes with student discipline codes. So I've always been under the, and again, Walton and team supported me, I've always been under the impression that, you know, student discipline and arrest, they're two different processes. Let them play out independently. So that's the one thing that we did. Now, a limitation to that is we don't capture everything. So that's something we're exploring in the future. Now, arrests on school premises, data collection and reporting, the rates are calculated, you know, as a number of arrests in school year divided by the total number of students enrolled at the beginning of the school year. Arrest rates provided indicate the number of arrests per 100 students. The rates are not the number of students arrested per 100 students, a relative rate index, something that I think DJS uses with regards to their data collection as well. What's notable about that is in 2015, what we found was roughly, you know, the total statewide population was roughly 900,000 students. And the arrest rate was 3.1 for every 1,000 students in Maryland K through 12 public schools. Comparatively, in 2015-16, the national arrest rate was 1.2 per 1,000 students. So essentially what I'm saying is Maryland was almost nearly three times the rate of the national average with regards to arrest of students in school. I'm going to take you through some stats here. Not going to focus too much on it, but as you can see in 2015-16, as I stated before, that was really when we started to collect data. Now, again, that was pretty much a trial and error type thing. A lot of local school systems really weren't familiar with the process. What I did discover by talking to many of my colleagues and constituents across the state was that, you know, some were underreporting, some were overreporting, some were reporting reportable offenses, which is something we don't collect. So really, you know, 2015-16 were really lessons learned for us. Now, it's also notable that in 2016-17, 2017-18, those years were collected simultaneously together, which was a hard take on. So I think those numbers are truly reflective of where we are as a state, because it was post the webinar, it was post technical assistance provided by, you know, our team in conjunction with the Maryland Center for School Safety. In 2018-19, you see a slight decrease. It's slight, you know, a little over 300 cases, but we're really proud of that because, again, it's really about bringing these numbers down. And again, you know, the whole narrative that, you know, we wanted to create throughout the state was, you know, we want to find other alternatives to discipline other than referring or arresting kids and getting them into the system, getting them on that rim, as I call it. And it, you know, the decrease is reflective of that. What I'm seeing throughout the state, I always tell Walt jokingly, one of my professors told me one time, sometimes, you know, you don't see your progress. He said, sometimes you got to get off the dance floor and get on the balcony. And what he talked about was when you're on the dance floor, you're kind of in it. You don't see the progress you're making. You just, you know, so you have to allow yourself to get on the balcony to really reflect on some of the work that you've done. And it's evident some of the work that Maryland has done with regards to arrest data and making improvements. You know, there's several committees. MAID recently started a committee with regards to tackling arrest data. Kate and I were recently on a call with Montgomery County and a team of administrators and principals addressing arrest data, Washington County, Frederick County. So the conversation's happening. Erase rates by local school system. Again, like I said, minimum increase, but still there's an increase. You know, don't like to, identify any one local school system, but this one is personal to me. Many of you may not know I am a Kent County native. I graduated from high school there, have great memories and ties there. But I also recognize how small Kent County is. So when I saw this number, it broke my heart. Again, I'm talking from a personal perspective. For me, it's so salient that I felt it was necessary to kind of mention. But that's concerning. It's really concerning. So that's something I felt to mention. But again, everything else is pretty relative to the size of the region. Arrests by local school systems, 2016 through 19. Again, if you look at Kent County, again, there's minimal increase, but some concerns with regards to relative to the size of the region and the number of arrests and the percentage increase. You're looking at 3.4, but again, I'll take any improvement. So slight improvement all the way around. We talk about race by ethnicity. Again, when we try to address these school to prison pipeline, as you can see, Black or African American students pretty much are arrested at a higher rate than their peer group of other races, which is why we're doing this. This is why we're addressing this through the collection of arrests. But again, a slight decrease. School systems are starting to utilize strategies as Mr. Salih mentioned in the suspension presentation, whether it's restorative practices, whether it's trauma-informed care. School systems are starting to adopt these philosophies and really employ them to decrease these arrest rates. And then we get to arrest by gender. Males, again, still lead the pack with regards to arrests as it pertains to gender, but it may not be reflective here, but females are closing that gap, and they are, starting to be arrested at a higher rate than normal, than we're accustomed to. This one was really concerning to me, as a therapist and a school psychologist. These are things that we talk about often with regards to students with disabilities and being afforded the services they need, and oftentimes, again, as it states, being arrested at a higher rate. This is really concerning. Again, and what that tells to me is that, whether it's our teachers, our administrators, really, I don't think it's a thing of malice, but I think it's just, really they're ill-equipped to really manage these students with disabilities. Thus, it's resulting in higher arrests, higher suspension, higher time out of school. Again, as arrested English language learners, as a school psychologist and therapist, this is one of the things we always monitor with regards to making sure that we rule out that a child's disability or a child's nationality is not a deficit or is not a concern with regards to their ability to remain in school or adapt to a specific curriculum. As you can see, a high rate of English language learners are subject to arrest. So these are things that we really have to monitor closely and address as we move forward. So where are we going? Again, like I stated before, I'm happy with the progress. I have an opportunity. I think what's this initiative with this time with March with COVID has allowed me to do is kind of reflect on the work. One of the things we're doing, and I'll elaborate a little bit, is we're working in conjunction with the Maryland Center for School Safety to develop and deliver, their primary lead, the school resource officer training curriculum to better prepare law enforcement how to handle conflict. These trainings include implicit bias, mental health, bullying prevention, reporting, and others. I feel like the work that the center does with regards to this is important. I let Mike Radinsky know and the team know the other day. I was like, this is something that we really feel needs to garnish a lot of attention. I think, we talked to Walt about presenting this even to the board. But also, one of the things we talk about profusely and ad nauseum is the importance of pre-diversion programs. And as much, I worked for the Department of Juvenile Services for 10 years in various roles as a probation officer, VPI director, you name it, so intake. So I know that system in and out. But one of the goals from an education standpoint is we want to build within our school systems pre-diversion programs. And when you talk about diversion, it's an attempt to divert or channel out youth from the juvenile justice system. So the programs, whatever we put in place, should be intentional with the goal that we want to keep kids off that funnel, before they even get into that school to prison pipeline, as they put it. Again, I'm reiterating the progress that Maryland has made with regards to the various work groups that I see occurring across the state. The narratives changing with regards to, resource officers, administrators using more soft skills, social emotional learning to kind of attach and develop and establish relationships with students to kind of mitigate having to arrest or suspend students. That pretty much concludes my presentation. I don't know if we have time for questions, but more than happy to field any that I can. Thank you.
Thank you, Ron. And I just want to thank you for that, and just point out once again that this effort with suspensions and with arrests is really a collaborative effort between the Maryland State Department of Education and Maryland Center for School Safety, as well as each of the local school systems there. I did see one question in the chat that I will address, and then before handing it back to Andy or Kate. So the question is from Delegate Ebersol, and this question is about the pre-K to 2 prohibition of suspension, which is in COMAR and now in state statute, and specifically wanted to know if this data were disaggregated somewhere. At the August 25th board meeting, there was a deeper dive into this very topic, and our research department with Dara Shaw and some others did a deep dive into what's happening with the pre-K to 2 prohibition on suspensions, and that is available on the board's website. So I will send that information to Kate, and there's some research questions there, and there's a pretty thorough data analysis. So I'll make that available to Kate to send to everyone. And with that, I'll turn it back to Andy or Kate.
Hey, I want to thank you guys for your insights, particularly on your history, and then talking about the relationship between suspensions or expulsions and arrest. So you talked about the Department of Juvenile Services, and with that, we'd like to hear from James Johnston, who is representing the Department of Juvenile Justice.
Good morning. Thanks again for inviting me to join today. I do have one slide that we'll put up in just a second. There we go. Thanks, Jessica. And I wanted to thank the presenters who came before me. I thought that was a really fascinating overview of some of the trends that are going on. So I'll give a very brief overview and then open it up for questions of how a young person comes into contact with the Department of Juvenile Services and then progresses through the system, especially that front door. We talk about the intake system. We talk about that function. We really think of it as the front door to the juvenile justice system in Maryland. And we'd like to figure out, working with our partners, ways to make sure that young people can be served outside of formal court processing and outside of a referral to the department, if possible. So just a few things, overall. And I think one key component here is thinking about how in Maryland, the juvenile justice system differs from the adult criminal court system, especially at the beginning of the process. So every juvenile matter in Maryland begins at a DJS intake office. We have one in each county. Our intake operation functions 24/7. It's available every day of the year. And the complaints are referred to juvenile intake by police, by citizens, and also by schools. Sometimes youth are brought directly to intake by the police officer after an arrest. Other times a complaint is filed and then to us without an arrest. So one thing that's important to us is when we're making a decision, and we'll talk about what decisions we have to make, that we use validated tools, which we have at each point of that decision-making process. So in deciding whether to formalize a case, in deciding whether or not to seek detention, those are things that we want to do only when we have really good information and we have validated tools that allow us to make an informed decision at that point. So when a DJS intake officer receives a complaint, and again, that can be from law enforcement bringing the young person there after an arrest to one of our facilities. It can be received, essentially by the police department or the school or other organizations sending us a copy of the report. Then the first step is that intake officer will assess the merits of the juvenile case. When I say the merits at this stage, what we're talking about is looking to see if it's legally sufficient. So is the young person, does it allege an offense? Does jurisdiction attach? And so that's really the first step that they take. And there are cases that may not meet that hurdle. But the first step really is deciding whether or not it's an appropriate complaint, if it states an offense. The second thing that's required then is to decide whether or not judicial action is in the best interest of the public or the child. And this is really where I think you start to see the differences between our system in terms of the Department of Juvenile Services and the way Maryland's juvenile system is structured, and then the system that we have in the adult criminal court. So we serve at this point really as a referee where the police and others are sending us complaints, and then we're determining if it's appropriate, using our validated tools, to send that matter on to the state's attorney and ultimately then to the court for more formal case processing. And I think to get back to what Dr. Brown said, we want to, whenever possible, avoid involving young people, whenever it's appropriate, avoid entering the formal juvenile justice system. So I think that's something to keep in mind as a goal. So as part of the intake process, the DJS intake officer is going to conduct an interview with that youth, with their family, their parent or caregiver, and also when it's applicable with the victim of that crime. The intake officer will take a look at the young person's, their background, any sort of delinquency history, social history. They'll look at the seriousness of the offense, and then they'll use our screening tool to generate a recommended intake decision. And then after that, there are a number of different options available to that intake officer when you're looking at decisions. So the first is resolving that matter at intake. And that's really proposing an informal adjustment period. So what that means essentially is that we have an agreement between the youth and their family and the Department of Juvenile Services where we put them under pre-court supervision. There might be, for example, a need to pay restitution. There might be a community service obligation. There might be some sort of other intervention. But as long as the youth is compliant with that intervention, then that case is not forwarded to the state's attorney for petitioning and then ultimately sent to the court to schedule a trial. The second option is authorizing a formal petition by the local state's attorney's office. So the prosecutors would file that. We make that when the decision of the intake officer is made that court action is in the best interest of the public or the youth. Violent felony offenses are always forwarded to the state's attorney's office. It's important to understand some offenses, felony offenses, handgun offenses, offenses where you do have a victim who does not agree with informal adjustment, those go to the state's attorney for consideration for more formal court processing. The final step of the intake process is to decide whether or not the youth may be released to the parent or caregiver, and if so, under what circumstances, what conditions, or if for safety reasons that youth requires placement in detention or potentially shelter care. Most youth are released to their parents. Sometimes there are conditions. We have available to us as well a number of options that are not necessarily detention, but include, in addition to shelter care, electronic monitoring, community detention. So those are options as well. And then, of course, if there is detention authorized, then the court reviews that. The young person appears in front of the court on the next business day. So when we look at juvenile court, one thing that I think is important to understand is that while juvenile court has some very significant differences from the adult criminal justice system, and certainly the focus on the well-being of the youth and sort of repairing any damage and making sure that that youth can be productive focusing on rehabilitation. Those are important considerations, more important certainly in the juvenile justice system than the way the adult criminal justice system is structured. But that said, juvenile court is formal court processing. It's not totally confidential in the sense that some serious cases, even in juvenile court, are open to the public. It's also not totally juvenile in the sense that there are about 33 offenses that have committed by a young person, and the police make an arrest. That is automatically an adult offense. One thing that you see in the school context sometimes would be either handgun offenses or first-degree assault. So felony assault, which at age 16 in Maryland is automatically an adult offense. So DJS is not part of that process, at least initially, in the sense that the police would make an arrest or they would take a young person into custody, and then that young person would be subject to adult case processing at that time, potentially return to juvenile court later in the system or through the system, but at least initially that young person would be in the adult criminal justice system. Also, the juvenile court is not, in a sense, without consequences. Certainly, you have young people who, as they progress further into the system, may be removed from the family home. You have the trauma associated with that. But you also have the enhanced adult sentencing. If you have a juvenile record, that can apply. You have prohibitions on things like firearm ownership. So there are collateral consequences, some associated with formal case processing and findings of delinquency in Maryland. Another thing that's really important when we look at this chart, and we look at how young people who come out of a school setting are involved in our system, the court processing time can be significant. So young people are required, if they are detained and then a trial date is scheduled, to be tried within 30 days in juvenile court. So again, much quicker than the adult criminal justice system, but still, that's 30 days. And that's only to trial, and that can, of course, be delayed. I think anyone who's familiar with the court process knows, unfortunately, even pre-COVID, you had substantial delays. So 30 days if detained, 60 days if not detained. And that's the minimum, in a sense, because you may have then, if there is a finding of delinquency, you may have you have first adjudication of the trial, but then you have essentially, you would have an adult court as a sentencing. You have the need to then determine what's the appropriate next step. Is it probation? Is it treatment outside the home? That can take a fair amount of time. And one thing that I think is important to us as a department, as a child serving agency, is trying to serve young people in a way that is closest to the problematic behavior. So services and interventions that are close to the youth and the youth's environment, and services and interventions that occur close in time to the conduct manifesting itself. So we want to use our tools and work with our partners, including those on this call, to avoid unnecessary incarceration and also to avoid the unnecessary duplication of services. And so we've been working with our partners to try to accomplish that goal. But again, I think this is a very brief overview of how our intake system works. And again, we are looking to balance the needs of communities, families, victims of crime, certainly. And we're looking overall to promote practices that are likely to reduce further system involvement rather than encourage system involvement. So again, I think the intake function, that front door function, is very different. And we serve, in a sense, as a sort of referee in many cases, determining if formal court processing is necessary, or if, hopefully, we can address the behavior and we can have that young person benefit from some of the non-court-based interventions that are available. If we do use that pre-court supervision, if we do supervise that young person through an informal adjustment, and that's unsuccessful, then we can send that case to the state's attorney for consideration for formal case processing and for the filing of a petition. So again, I think there's some excellent work being done here by this group. And that was a pretty quick overview, but I wanted to make sure we had a few minutes for questions, and I'm certainly happy to answer those. I think there's some in chat, so I'll take a look at those as well. And if we can't answer your question now, I'll be happy to get back to you in just a few days. Thank you very much.
So, are there any questions for Jay right now before we get into our discussion? Okay, I want to get into the heart of the matter as far as what we're doing and what we're interested in here. We are interested in the perception of the school to prison pipeline as it may be enforced or reinforced by incorrect data of either over-reporting or under-reporting. So to start out, I think we need to talk about a definition for arrest, and I'm going to ask Dawn to give us the definition for arrest, particularly on school property.
So just by way of background, I know it talks in here, and Dr. Brown alluded to the fact that there was a shift or a change in the data collection. So in the summer of 2017, after the initial data, I believe from the 2016-2017 academic year came in on student arrest, it became apparent that not all school systems were using the same definition of what constituted an arrest. And so there are certain jurisdictions that were only reporting custodial arrests. Others were reporting custodial citations, referrals to DJS. So once that problem came to light and was surfaced, there were updated regulations in COMAR provided related to the data collection, which I think were finalized in maybe September of 2017. I had written a legal memo related to the definition of arrest specific to this issue that assisted with redoing those regulations. So an arrest, for purposes of this report and for how we quantify an arrest in general, should include any time the child is being subjected to the jurisdiction of the court. So that includes a custodial arrest, referral to DJS, or a citation. And I'm happy to answer any questions that anybody has about that.
So with that, when a child is arrested on school property, either by referral or citation or physical arrest, they are referred to the juvenile justice system. And in fact, then they become a part of the juvenile justice system. So the idea there is what we're trying to talk about here is the school to prison pipeline. How do we interrupt that? There's a lot of thought out there thinking that schools are sending kids to jail, and that may not be the case. So that's important that we get the accurate data that we have. So the second question here is, who on school property determines if an arrest is warranted? Now, to give you somewhere to start on that, there are 5 incidents that can occur that the SRO, the school resource officer, has carte blanche on. That is if it's involving drugs or alcohol, if it's involving a sexual assault, if it's involving assault with an injury, and the next one is if it involves an assault on a staff. And the last one is weapons on campus. So if the SRO has carte blanche or has authority to do that, then what happens? Where are these other incidents coming from that students are being arrested for? Did anybody want to take that?
Hey, Andy, this is Ron. I wanted to back up just a second. There's a question from John Courier that we didn't really address. It's either for James or maybe for Ron Brown, but it wanted some more information on the types of arrests from each jurisdiction and broken down by type. So physical arrest, paper arrests, whether there's civil or criminal charges, and then what kind of disposition is done at DJS.
Andy, I have a follow-up question too that might be just related to what you just said as we go into this discussion. You mentioned that the officers have, I think you used the phrase carte blanche on certain types of offenses. Where does that come from? Or what's the authority for that?
Well, that comes from practical experiences and talking with other safety coordinators, safety directors. When those incidents occur, it's not that they don't have conversations, but more than likely they're going to be arrested.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure that it wasn't, a legal requirement or something that was broken out like that. You're talking about based on practice or experience or conversations that you've had, rather than this is the way it is in a statute or this is the way it is in a regulation, correct?
That's absolutely correct.
Okay.
And Dawn, this
question
is
that
Walt.
Ron
I
had.
just wanted to. Oh, I'm sorry, Dawn. This is Walt. I just wanted to jump in and say that you've mentioned something about the type of arrests and how they're broken down in the report that's published, and I think they're all online now. It talks about and it breaks down each of the offenses by offense code and a description of the offense as well. So all of that's detailed in each of the reports, actually going back to the first one.
That's correct. Yep. And it does list whether it was a referral, a citation, or custodial arrest in that report.
That is correct. Yep.
Mm-hmm.
And I will point out, and I'm certainly happy to share my contact information if there are data questions. I'm sure Dr. Brown and I and others can work together to try to resolve any questions. And we have a really good data shop on the DJS side, so I'm happy to assist in any way I can. You may have a circumstance where you have an arrest and no referral. So certainly, in this process, one of the things that, we're certainly happy to see are ways that the police departments and other organizations can, I think as referenced, resolve even relatively difficult circumstances without the need for a referral. So you may see that as well. And I think that shows in the data.
The next question deals with what policies exist regarding non-criminal activities like fighting or those kinds of things. How is it handled? And I'm asking the group this, from your experiences, how is it handled in the schools that you're familiar with?
Andrew, this is Chief Kuiper at Hagerstown Police. I can speak on behalf of the Hagerstown portion of the Washington County Schools and how the SROs here handle those things. It comes down to not just the circumstance of the actual incident, but they look at totality of the activity that student may have been involved in over the course of the school year, previous activity that was handled, that disciplinary actions or things that was handled at the school, to the point where there may be an example where a student was being handled at the school level in appropriate disciplinary fashion or through the mentoring kind of program that the school's putting in place, and it just wasn't happening. And that, even though that offense may not be a major offense, it's a culmination of that student's activity over the course of time in that school year. And they may then do a referral or do a paper arrest, because then the resources that are lacking in our community to get that student into other programs, the Department of Juvenile Justice can offer those things once it gets them into that intake process. So I know it sounds counterintuitive of breaking the cycle, but sometimes that gets used, the system gets used to get that child the services that they need. But we have recently, in the last year and a half, started working on a pre-arrest diversion program in conjunction with the Department of Juvenile Justice here in Presley Ridge. And that's just been a funding source problem on and off, but we've been working on that as a formalized program here in Washington County. But that's one of the reasons that someone that's involved in a minor offense might be arrested or charged, I should say, and put into the juvenile justice system.
Thank you, Chief. Our after hours activities. Are arrests made on school property after hours reported to the school by local police, and are local school systems reporting that data? How are arrests being reported to schools?
Andy, do you mean for students, or do you mean, because I know some departments, and Chief Kiefer, you might be able to chime in here, but some departments have codes where they're geographically coding things. So there might be, an incident that takes place in the parking lot of the school that doesn't involve anybody affiliated with the school and happens at midnight. But in the way they geocode their data, it's going to show up as having taken place on the school property, but that's not that doesn't really impact the school to prison pipeline analysis. Are you talking about arrests related to the school age population and like reportable offenses or other community arrests, or just what occurs on school grounds or in school transportation?
We're talking about student arrest data. That's what this conversation is about. And reportable offenses may not occur on school property. Many times they occur out in the community and is reported to the school as a heads up kind of conversation. So what I'm interested in is after hours activities on school property, how are they reported and how are they recorded?
I can speak on behalf of that. So if it's an after hours incident on school property, and we'll use a couple of different scenarios here. If it's an event, an athletic event, chorus, orchestra, something like that, and it's a student of that school that's involved, then we report that to the school. If it's obviously if it's a reportable offense, we give a heads up to any school, whether it's on the school that they go to or not, or out in the community. But if it's an after-school event or an after-school incident that occurs on the school property, that's a student at that school, we will report. Generally, that doesn't happen just in a non-event school activity event situation here that I can speak to. But we would still notify the school if there was, malicious destruction of property on the school by a student. We would report that to the school, even though it was after hours. If it was a minor fight that occurred on the school property, had nothing to do with the school event, we would give notice to the school, but that data wouldn't be captured as a school arrest data if there was any kind of charges filed, because it didn't really apply to a school function. I hope that answers your question.
And if I could also jump in, I certainly, Chief Kiefer's absolutely correct. There is sometimes some gray area. So we, if it is directly related to a school event during the school day or on campus, say a football game, and there's something occurs at the game, then that would be attributed to the school as arrest data. Likewise, if let's say we've had instances where there has been a fight on campus, it's been handled as a disciplinary event, students have been sent home, and then a parent later that day or evening or into the next week decides to press charges, and a patrol officer sent to the house to take a statement, that could possibly come back to, that could be considered arrest data associated with school because it was related to a school event. But sometimes there is some gray area, as Dawn mentions, about the geocoding and whether that is to be reported or not reported because it is on campus, it is on the premises, versus it is, as Chief Kiefer talks about or tries to delineate, that it is a school event itself. But that does cause some consternation for those of us that are trying to maintain that data and what's reportable, what's to be reported and not. So we err on the side of caution, and if it comes back to us as reported arrest data, we report it.
Hi, this is Ron. Great discussion. I think it's also important to note that any offenses must be reported by school personnel. One of the things I've encountered even during this COVID time, is that even though we're not in brick and mortar schools, I still have kids who are on campus committing offenses. So the question often, exists is like, how do we report this? And again, it depends on who's important. Is there school personnel there? They're like, no. It's like, then we just count it as a reportable offense, but yeah, this is a great discussion because, like you said, Dr. Galato, there's a gray area. There's a huge gray area that, we're still examining. This is ongoing. This is why I'm so excited about these work groups, because again, there's always opportunities to revamp this arrest data and how we collect it.
I have an interesting question for you guys. When a student is arrested, is he also suspended or expelled?
So that's so, if I'll jump in first, that is so situation and student dependent. Expulsions are rare. Certainly in Anne Arundel County, while our arrest data overall is up, the expulsions are rare, and it's for very, if it's a weapon on campus, that's a given. But no, it's not necessarily that in every arrestable offense it is a suspension, but many times it is a one. There are many instances where it is a 1-for-1.
All right, thank you.
And we've seen here the same thing, and we've been working over the last couple of years with school administrators on the fact that probably there were situations where students should have just had a suspension or inter school discipline done, and that we felt, or in looking back to our data, that possibly the arrest or the charges were used as a discipline for the school. So we've been working very hard with our administrators here to clean that up significantly and to come up with an idea of what is working here. If it's a pretty serious offense, not necessarily one of those enumerated ones that Mr. Turner had brought up, but something that significantly impacted the school, to have a charge put on a child and then the child's back in school the next day sometimes sends a message that it didn't have any impact, especially if it wound up being a paper arrest, we declare here sometimes. But so we're having these discussions ongoing in our systems here in Washington County.
Thank you, sir. Do you know if there's any forms that are used in the schools for paper arrest or physical arrest, or are there any different kind of forms that are used for police and paper or physical arrest?
Let me, in terms of the schools, and it has not been mentioned yet on this call and this discussion, but I think it's important that it is mentioned, is that the schools and school personnel aren't arresting anybody. We don't have that authority, paper or otherwise. So there are no arrest forms that exist within a school system to place a student under arrest. We don't have that authority. It is our law enforcement partners that have that authority to do that. And so I very much appreciate Chief Kiefer's mentioning the work they're doing there in Washington County. We are doing the same with our Anne Arundel County Police Department, is really trying to bring our SROs and our administrators together to really understand the separation of roles and responsibilities. I think that's something that we need to be talking more about, because school system personnel aren't arresting anybody. But we also, at the same time, we may be using our law enforcement partners, our SRO, as a crutch in that disciplinary process. Sometimes it puts, it adds to the severity of, and sometimes administrators are looking for that if they've got a particular student that they're working with. So I think that's part of the conversation that has to be had, is that people clearly understand that schools are not arresting anybody. We don't have that authority. Yet we've got to really work hand in glove with our law enforcement partners, our SROs here in Anne Arundel County in particular, and I'll speak only for us, in that we really understand our roles and responsibilities within the school. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
The forms that we use here are just our in-house agency forms. I know the Sheriff's Department in Washington County uses their forms. So it's an arrest document that basically captures all the basic data that would apply to any arrest, whether it be an adult or a juvenile. And then it's filed that way to Juvenile Services, along with the actual report. And as the doctor just alluding to, we've worked on some things here where we're in discussion to talk about a waiting period on some of these offenses, to let cooler heads prevail before actual charges are brought on a child. So in certain instances where administrators or teaching staff might be emotionally charged based upon what happened, that we handle that situation with the administrators at that moment, and then we allow some time to pass, 24 to 48 hours, to see if that is the approach that needs to be made in terms of charges, or if there is another alternative that can come out of that. So that's some of the discussions we're working on as well, to allow that to play out. Because in the scheme of things, in our world, in law enforcement, the school or the school staff could be the victim of the alleged crime per se. So we have to take into account that victims' requests and rights to what they want done. So we're trying to, again, get everybody on board as to the roles that we all play, but how we can work a little bit better together on those things. So we can work on the trauma approach. We can work on those other, and it gives my SROs the opportunity to do some research on that child to find out if there's anything going on outside of the school, at home, through other services that may help to build a plan on dealing with the situation that the child's got themselves into.
Thank you, Chief. This leads me to another question. How do schools track students who have been arrested? And let me ask you this: is there any way that the schools can determine the disposition once that student has been arrested?
If I could, I'll take this one. This is one of those things where we're talking about limitations, something that again I'm proud of, because again DJS is at the table, and I've seen this in various local school systems. But when I came to MSDE, I knew that was going to be a gap in the process, because and Mr. Johnston, if you can back me up on this, DJS is really guarded with regard to that data, as they should be, to preserve anonymity of sorts. So with that, that's something we're working on. I think it's amazing that, again, DJS is at the table in various local school systems. So that's something we're tackling. That's currently, in my opinion, a gap, because again, we can't consistently. It's been a struggle to consistently collect that.
And I will back up Dr. Brown on that. And certainly, we recognize there are places we have some really good data and a really good data team, but there are places where you have sort of a mix of systems. One place where we have trouble sometimes with data, for example, can be when youth are charged as adults, right? So when they start in a different system and then potentially come to us. And this is another one of those areas. So we're committed to working with our partners and making sure that whatever data we do have that we're legally allowed to share, that we're able to be a good partner on this.
Hey, Andy, it's Ron. I had a quick question that just came in for the group. It's regarding what educational opportunities are available to students expelled from school.
So we work with, many of the school systems work with those students that have been expelled. By definition, that would be 45 days or more from the school system for that serious offense. We continue to try and provide some basic supports for those students. But that's an area that I think we need to think more carefully about statewide as to what options are available to those students that have been expelled. We then work with that family after their time period of the expulsion, whatever it is complete, about then readmitting them, getting them back into school.
This puts us right where we want to talk about. We want to talk about the diversionary programs that may exist. Are there any community referencing programs for diversion rather than arrest? Anybody know of any programs that are available?
This is Chief Cooper again. Like I said earlier, we started working with DJJ and Presley Ridge to work on wraparound services for juveniles and then their families, both other students and the adults, to work on that trauma and work on the other issues that are associated with these children. We also have incorporated and developed, along with the Sheriff's Department up here in Washington County, we've adapted the LEAD program, which is the Adult Law Enforcement Assisted Diversion Program for the drug side of things. And we've created the same program for juveniles here as well, which we're real proud of. Again, it takes some of those low-lying offenses that build on, unfortunately, to bring these children into more serious things sometimes. We're really working hard on some of those programs. The issue with the programs that we have, at least here in Washington County, is resources and the availability of those resources and the funding and the money that goes along with that. So we struggle with those things. We look for GOCCP to help with grants, and we apply for those things. But that's been one of the biggest hurdles that we've had here in trying to develop those things, is that it's just in our county out here in the western part of the state, the resources are a little slim.
Okay. There are a couple, and you're right, they're really slim with regard to resources across the state with regards to pre-diversion programs. I know in Anne Arundel County, they have an amazing one. I think if you guys remember Tamika Perkins that Steve Thomas we presented at the school safety conference, she's expanded upon that program with regards to pre-diversion, and she's going to roll out a pilot soon. So I'm excited for them. She's going to present at the May our arrest data group on October 2nd. So I'm excited to see. I've already seen the presentation. It's amazing. Again, Anne Arundel County is really fortunate to have them. I think they could be a model for the state. Again, but resources, different in each county, but they do an amazing job. So, and you also have the joint program in Baltimore County. They have an amazing program as well, and I think they work closely with Baltimore County Police. And then lastly, I think there's a program, I serve on the board for Lead for Life. They have a diversion program in Frederick County that I've encouraged them to work closely with as well. So it's growing, but again, as you mentioned, it's just resources. It's really what it comes down to.
One of the things we'd like to hear about is if anybody has any pre-arrest diversion programs, meaning that students get involved in different kinds of offenses and they have an opportunity to go to one of these programs rather than to go into the criminal justice system. Does anybody have anything like that out there?
Well, Andy, that's some of the programs I mentioned. Those are all pre-diversion programs. I think when you think about 1A, 1B would be DJS doing the diversion. But again, we prefer that schools be intentional in their efforts to establish pre-diversion programs. So kids don't have to even get involved in that DJS process. Ultimately, that would be the goal. That would be beautiful.
And our pre-arrest that we work with DJJ with isn't a DJJ program. It's prior to them. We've just worked with them as a partner that if the diversion through Presley Ridge doesn't work and there's issues that go along with that then can be transferred to DJJ, still become a diversion program, secondary at that point, still gives opportunity there, but may hold more authority or accountability over that child or the parents of that child to get them into a program that maybe they're not voluntarily doing prior to. So that's still holding up. It's basically a checks and balances we built with DJJ, but it is not a DJJ program. It's prior to DJJ. I did make that clear the first time.
Thank you, sir.
That's great.
I would add, Andy, if you don't mind, I would also add what was discussed previously in the presentation. A number of the initiatives that are already ongoing, PBIS, restorative practices and restorative approaches in trauma-informed care, social-emotional learning, and really students identifying students in those schools and school systems well before they get to the arrest place, and time where we're trying to work with students, identify them, get them a mentor, do some of those restorative approaches early on in some of those low-level offenses, as the chief talked about. But I think that's happening across the state, and school by school, their schools, principals and teachers really rolling up their sleeves to get involved with kids to keep them out of the arrest or referral cycle.
Sir, you really have a handle on it. Thank you very much. I saw in the chat that Jashir had something that she wanted to add to the conversation.
Yes, it was more about SROs in relation to juvenile arrests, but I had a bit more to say on that topic, so I didn't want to interrupt your flow of questioning. So I would be fine if you wanted to finish up your questions, and then I could speak more on that, so I'm not interrupting some information that you wanted to get.
This is your time.
This is my time? Okay, thank you so much. So at the beginning of the presentation, all of you heard about the student focus group, and they're actually a really great medium for me to get feedback on how they feel about the issues that we're discussing at our meetings. And in asking them about juvenile arrests, 2 students brought up a point, and I've also seen it myself in my own county, which I'll touch on. But one student said, "I've heard many instances of people getting off possible charges as opposed to a person of color receiving the same one with worse conditions to their sentence." And another from Baltimore County said, "Juveniles made up 24% of violent crime arrests in the county, with the African American population being disproportionately affected." So I think the issue of disproportionality is something that students and communities are really noticing. And I know in the presentation, it was addressed that MSDE direct support is being utilized to combat this through PBIS and through data dashboards, and most notably through the collaboration with MCSS's new SRO training program. However, I have noticed that there is a growing misconception within the community, and I'm sure many of you have too, that SROs are actively perpetuating some kind of institutional racism because of the data that's being released on these disproportionalities. So I wanted to bring to all of your attention the magnitude of the issue, as well as the influence of social media in exacerbating it. So even though school resource officers exist for students, students are ones who are rising up in large numbers against SROs instead of advocating on their behalf. And this could probably be chalked out to the fact that SROs are kind of an emerging role in schools that aren't as clearly defined as some of the other ones we see in schools, like counselors and psychologists. So due to some misconceptions and just seeing the data, students are compelled to rise up. For example, in Howard County, my own county, students are strongly identifying with the Black Lives Matter movement and are looking to make a difference in whatever way they can, which for us as students starts with schools. Currently in Howard County, a hashtag police-free HCPSS movement is active on social media, and over 450 current and former students, parents, and teachers have signed a petition that resolves the Howard County Board of Education to dissolve its memorandum of understanding between the Howard County Police Department. So this would thereby remove all SROs from schools. So while the idea that such a petition would actually influence the board may seem implausible, at the September 10th meeting, this exact mention was raised by the student member of the board. And 4 members of the board voted for this motion, while 2 voted against and 2 abstained. So while this motion did not pass for now, I think we can all see that it was dangerously close, and it truly illustrates how imminent this issue is and how social media movements can translate to action. They're not just going to stay on social media, people are going to rise up from them and actually take it to the school boards. And Howard County is only one example here. Many other county boards of education are debating the removal of SROs and leveraging the fact that we are not in school right now to take a closer look at it. So with all of them, I think it's important to clarify that they're well-intentioned, because none of us want more than anything to create a equitable environment for all students, but removing SROs isn't the best way to go about that. And as stakeholders who work closely with MCSS, we know that because they can be powerful in forming these community relationships and aren't always the one to initiate arrests. And even if more mental health personnel are brought in, school fights and incidents of violence are not going to completely diminish. So in that case, adequate coverage will come in, but all of us know that that has its limitations. However, the problem here is that most members of the general public do not have this awareness because the media narrative is largely focusing on the disproportionality statistics. And we talked a lot about how there's some flaws in these statistics and they're not truly reflective per se and should be taken with a grain of salt because we're working to improve the data collection and reporting mechanisms. So that is coming together and leading people to conclude that SROs should be removed. But I really believe that MCSS needs to be taking decisive, immediate action to change this narrative. And that begins with the following. So either due to omission bias or lack of knowledge, the new MCSS SRO training curriculum is being largely ignored by the media. So I think that MCSS should seek to bring more media awareness to the topics covered in this curriculum because they have de-escalation and they have disability and diversity awareness and implicit bias. And this is the exact kind of social change that people are hungry for at this point in time. Additionally, many boards of education are making decisions or looking to make decisions when they don't have a full set of information. So I think that MCSS should be providing them with the materials that give them a full picture, not looking to influence them, but just looking to give them a full picture that can aid them in making their decision. I know that our topic of discussion today was largely on juvenile arrests, but this removal of SROs and like the public misconceptions surrounding how juvenile arrests and SROs are related is a huge topic that people around the state are talking about. So I thought that it shouldn't be ignored. Thank you for indulging my request and letting me to talk about it for 2 minutes and share my thoughts, but I would definitely want to hear from the rest of the advisory board and hear your input on all of this.
This is Megan Berger. Thank you, Jayshree, for your thoughts. So I work at Disability Rights Maryland. We're the protection and advocacy organization for the state of Maryland. And so the issue of disproportionality is one that is very concerning to us because of the disproportionate rate of both exclusionary discipline and school-based arrests for students with disabilities and students of color, English language learners. And so I think the data is incredibly important and compelling and telling. The disproportionality is there. And I think one of the concerns is that because in 2019-20, all local school systems now have SROs because of the Safe to Learn Act. Some schools had them before, but now all districts have school resource officers. And I think 2019-20's arrest data is going to be skewed because of COVID and the school closures, but I think we really need to pay attention to the data now that there's school resource officers in every local school system, because I know, we know that there are jurisdictions where there has been an increase in juvenile citations that are specifically attributed to school resource officers being in schools. And so I sort of posted the great majority of school-based arrests are for relatively minor developmentally typical behaviors like fistfights or disrespect or disruption. And we know that Black students of color don't misbehave any more than their white students, but they are being arrested at a higher rate. And so that is really where, at least for my organization, where we're really concerned. And I think this is a really important conversation, and I really appreciate everybody's perspectives. And I really appreciate students' perspectives because you guys are the ones in the schools. And so I really appreciate your perspective. And I've also heard and represented, the students who are arrested for disability-related behavior. So I just wanted to sort of, throw that out there as well, and that I think this is a really important conversation.
Megan, thank you.
Jumping on this. I think a lot of it comes down to the trust and loyalty, of what's going on with the schools when it comes to SROs, teachers, school psychologists, all the different levels of help that we have that we're dealing with. And I witness this all the time because I think about a fight that happens in the hallway, and you might have two APs come to break it up, and yet here's one of the coaches of the kids comes over there and the kid stops, right? Because he trusts the coach. Coaches have trained for this type of stuff, but he trusts the coach. So he's going to stop for the coach out of that trust and loyalty and that respect. But that's also because he sees the coach outside of the building itself. He sees the coach at a different time. And I think when it comes to this, it's, we're at this day and age where we're persuaded by a title of an article and then we're going to run with it. And then if someone says this is the way it is, I'm more loyal to what I deem as family. Or I can trust somebody, family's good for me or bad, but what I deem as family, which is blood related or not blood related, I'm going to trust them more than anybody else. So if they already come in and say, you can't trust this guy, and the only time you see this guy is when he has a uniform on doing his job, I think those are when you run into those issues. I think the biggest thing, and everybody knows me, I'm always preaching about programs outside of the school time. And with our, for our situation, 1 hour lunch, sometimes programs within the school time, I think the more that we can do activities together, so we can see a different side of individuals, get to know individuals, and quote unquote do the research on each other, I think the better off we're going to be. And that way you're not reading the headline or joining the campaign or joining the rally. You're actually looking at the situation saying, okay, I understand why he did what he did on that situation. For our particular kids, when I watch a fight break out, really the only time I see a kid get arrested is because things just got ridiculous and it just could not be controlled, could not be stopped. But I can tell you our SRO, when he comes down here, he tries to talk to individuals, as long as things stop and stay calm. He tries to teach them like human beings. He tries to give them the respect. He doesn't want to put cuffs on them because he don't want that stigma to be added to the situation. He tries to do his best to relate with the kid. And what I like about it is when that kid gets suspended for 3 days, when that kid comes back to school, our SRO would immediately go talk to that kid to have a conversation, ask how you doing, do you feel better? Like he's trying to reach back out to him. Now that kid can see, okay, this person did act a certain way, but they might have acted this way because of what I did. And when we have a simple conversation, they realize, okay, maybe he's not that bad. He's a good guy. So the next time we have a situation now, they can come in and have a conversation to stop it instead of having to use a physical action. So I think the interaction part between, SROs and the student body, which I've talked about before, and I think a lot of SROs are doing it. Ours is doing great. It's been through all the classes and stuff that have been offered. He's been wonderful. I haven't heard too many things about them in St. Mary's County or any issues like that, but also that comes in anybody. If you have your school psychologist, your school counselor, the more they're involved with that particular individual outside of what their designated job is, I think the better the trust is built, and then all of a sudden your building, your school becomes a true campus to the community instead of a building that sits within the community.
It's very good. Someone else?
Mr. Bell.
Hi, Andy. This is Ron. Jayshree, amazing, comprehensive points. And again, I think you bring up a good point just about the whole SRO and their perception. The things I've been speaking closely lately with Mike Rudinsky about is, and I guess I asked so much, can I get his permission to kind of present? We are going to be presenting to the board, but we were thinking about various components as they tie into social emotional learning. And oftentimes we don't equate school resource officers with social emotional learning. And if you understand social emotional learning, it's really about establishing a culture much like Mr. Bell just spoke about. And resource officers and school security personnel play a big part in that. So my connection was, let's talk about, like Jayshree spoke of, the training that the Center for School Safety are conducting on a regular basis. That's all social emotional learning. And it's giving resource officers and school security personnel a different perspective on how to conduct themselves within the schools. I live in York, Pennsylvania. I live in York City, and I live near, well, I'm only gonna be living here for a couple more months, but I live near one of the bigger high schools in Pennsylvania. It's urban. And I had an opportunity to go over there because their model was recognized nationally for school resource officers. So the principal allowed me just to spend a day there, and I wanted to observe. And what I observed is how and you're talking gangs, you're talking Latinos, every race you can mention. But what I wanted to see was how the resource officers conducted themselves, how they interacted with these kids. And just like Mr. Bell spoke about, they possessed amazing soft skills. They pick their battles on a daily basis. You can see when a kid will walk down the hallway with a hat. Do you really want to really pick that battle right now, knowing the context in which the kid exists in his life outside of school? So these are the kind of things I observed, and it allowed me to kind of take this back to Maryland and kind of employ it in my job and say, this is what we need to be striving for. And honestly, again, I think Jayshree, you make a good point with regard to, again, getting off the dance floor and getting on the balcony and looking exactly at what we're doing. Again, I give the Center for School Safety kudos, Mike Rudinsky and that team with regards to how you guys roll out that curriculum. I think it's amazing. And sometimes, again, it's just about comparison. As a therapist, I'm a DBT therapist with dialectical therapy, which means sometimes you got to compare to what other systems are doing. And Maryland should be proud, so great point. Just felt like I should mention that.
This is good discussion, and we're finding that everybody is trying to go to the same point, looking at it from different perspectives, as Ron is saying, from the balcony. The conversation today was talking about trying to put together some kind of uniform reporting of arrests in schools, because we feel that the arrests that are reported by the police and the arrests that are reported by DJS are often off. They're not the same information. So what we're going to be trying to do is find a way that we can correlate that information so it's all saying the same thing. The other thing that we're going to be doing and investigating is pre-arrest diversion programs. We have some different programs that are starting in our schools, and we want to know how well they're working. So that's the position that MCSS is going to be pushing forward, and also trying to get the advisory group to come up with some ideas as far as how do we monitor this? How do we develop data to support this myth about the school to prison pipeline? Are there any other discussions? Okay, Kate, I'm going to turn it back over to you.
Rachel, did you have something you wanted to add?
Yes, just very briefly. I just wanted to say I'm glad that we started this conversation about SROs and what's going on at the local level and nationally, what that conversation looks like. And I just wanted to really briefly throw out there that it's my impression, having been a former state employee, that the Maryland Center for School Safety is probably, this advisory group is probably not going to be in a position to weigh in on, do we want SROs or do we not, if and when legislation is introduced in the upcoming session. And I could be wrong. But I would say to all those groups that you should expect something. There's going to be probably multiple ideas about what to do and what is the role of SROs at the local level. And, particularly because of COVID and how we look at maybe doing a possible hybrid or virtual session, it's going to be a very different process. And so I think that while this group has lots of great examples, and we can talk internally about the value of SROs and what the curriculum looks like and all of the work that was put in to do that, having that, for those that want to have that conversation externally, I think that it was brought up really well that has to, for folks that find that value in the SRO programs, that should be a discussion. And maybe that's a discussion between folks in their individual organizations, not necessarily the advisory committee, but I could be wrong. My 2 cents.
Rachel, thank you. I would add, Andrew, that I think we should be talking more in depth about while the SRO training is available and excellent and covers so many of the points that Jayshree talked about in her very well prepared and eloquent remarks, giving us lots to think about. I think we have to talk about not just the relationship, we have to talk about the working relationship between SROs and school administrators and giving them some sort of working targets and some guardrails, if you will, for lack of better terms, so as they're operating in their schools when they're dealing with specific situations, like you see that the arrest data is high for fights in a school. Well, why is that? That's a disciplinary event that most administrators should be managing versus something the SRO should be managing, unless there's injury or there's a weapon or those sorts of things involved. So I think we ought to be talking also into the future a little bit more about that relationship between administrators and their SROs and how they're working together. Again, just my 2 cents. So I thank everybody for their thoughts and for their comments. Very much appreciated. Ron and Walt and Jay, all thank you very much for your thoughtful presentations. Certainly more to talk about into the future. I thank you for that. Kate, anything from you at this stage?
No, I just want to remind everyone. So the legislative changes that came about from the Safe to Learn Act. So, they required the development of this specialized training for school resource officers. There was also some additional requirements for other SROs or adequate coverage in each public school. I will say for last school year, there were approximately 1,427 public schools in Maryland, and there were only 360 SROs. So it is important to remember that the majority of public schools in the state are being covered by adequate coverage and not an assigned SRO. Additionally, we went through the training last summer, and we have an opportunity over the coming years to look at, refine, see if there's ways that we can expand on the SRO training program, if we can do additional training. To Dr. Rolato's point, if the center can help sort of build some recommendations for school systems to implement, so we can set up those sort of what are the limits and whose responsibility is what, so we can certainly take that on. And I'll chime in with what everybody else has said. Jayshree did a beautiful job in articulating her points, and I have made note. Jayshree, just so you know, I've jotted down doing more media awareness on the SRO training and what it does, developing specific materials, whether they're for the media or for the general public or for the local boards of education on the SRO program. We can start to have that conversation and participate in that narrative. So thank you.
I just had one more thing to say here. So thank you everyone for being so receptive to my remarks, and to those of you who weighed in on the conversation and shared your perspective from your stakeholder view. That was also really useful. I just want to clarify that my remarks were in no way intended to suggest that the system's already perfect. I think we talked a lot about how SROs are an evolving role and how there is a lot of improvement to be done, but there is also a lot of progress that we've made. So the true intent at the end of what I was trying to say is just raise more awareness to the progress that we've made, so that that perspective is taken into consideration when boards and individuals are making decisions and forming opinions, so that they're not just hearing one side, the negative side of the story, and not hearing the progress that we've made on the state level. But thank you so much, everyone.
Wonderful. Thank you, Jayshree. So with that, we've got about 2 minutes left in our time together. We are scheduled, I believe we're scheduled for an October advisory board meeting. But I think, and I understand that the sub-cabinet is not going to meet again until November 9th. I think that's correct, Kate. I see you shaking your head. Thank you. So if it's okay with the group, I'm going to cancel our October meeting, and we will meet again on November 2nd. And we'll continue this conversation and then begin to share our thoughts with the on this subject with the sub-cabinet for their consideration. So we will meet again on November 2nd, and it will be in this virtual environment. And we'll continue in this vein until further notice, unfortunately. Is there anything for the good of the order? And I'll look for hands raised. Last comments or thoughts? Not seeing any hands. Thank you all very much. Could I have anyone make a motion to adjourn?
It looks
I
like
see.
Alden.
Yep, Mr. Alden has made a motion to adjourn. Do I have a second?
Secretary Padilla.
Thank you very much. All those in favor of adjournment, please raise your hand physically. Anybody that would like to continue the conversation further into the afternoon? I don't see any hands. Thank you very much. You all are wonderful. Thank you for your thoughts and input. Thank you for the good work, and please be safe. Thank you.